Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your soul. You are now listening to the Old Paths Podcast, hosted by Brother Reggie Paige.
Peace and blessings, everybody, and welcome back to the Old Paths Podcast, aka the OP Podcast. I am your host, Brother Reggie Paige, and before we even go further, please like, subscribe, and comment, and share the knowledge with your folks and kinfolks. And let's get started. When it comes to being humble and keeping things simple, our use of language sometimes can interfere with those things coming into play in our lives. With words, you can bring comforting solace to a distressed soul, or you can make the love of your life blush with sweet words. But you can also use words to deceive and hurt others. The scripture says in Matthew, the 5th chapter of the 37th verse, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. With us humans, we have this evil habit to be very deceptive with our words and choose not to be plain and clear with our language and let our yea mean yea and nay, nay. Some people outright lie or use softer words instead of clear language. In the American religion, many people have the title of reverend, pastors, bishops, apostles. Unfortunately, many either self-ordained themselves that title or earned that title through the crooked path. In the scriptures, the office of the bishop or deacon has qualifications. And when you encounter many of these so-called pastors who may be females or just upped and started their own church, they have done so falsely in the eyes of God and are not really pastors or deacons or bishops, yet they give themselves or others give them that title. However, these people live falsely because this false way of living brings in a lot of money and fame. We see this in academia as well, where people call themselves doctors even though they never earned a PhD. And when it comes to the use of softer words or what we call euphemisms, it is pathetically as blatantly lying. A stealer won't say they stole, right? They'll say that they borrowed something. These are our first examples of folks not using clear language purposefully to deceive for fame and maybe money, or just because. Some folks avoid using clear language because they want to avoid difficult topics. Have you ever met someone who wants to be perceived as smart? You may be talking to them and you can look into their eyes and see their countenance that the subject you may be talking about is ignorant to them. However, this person who wants to be perceived as smart says, I understood everything you said, when in reality, they understood nothing. You ask them if they know about maybe the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. Their reply will be, oh, yeah, I knew that, even though they may know nothing about the Harlem Renaissance. Another example I would like to use of people trying to avoid difficult topics usually happens betwixt friends. Let me be more specific. I did have a friend who I asked if it was wise to pursue a certain girl. Now, my friend did not think this girl was the best option for me, as well as probably not the wisest decision to pursue. However, my friend chose to say, yeah, it's cool for you to pursue her. Just take it slow, despite truly feeling another way. Now, with both of these examples, both people fail to use clear language, aka what I like to call keeping it real, and saying what they actually mean. See, with the first example of the guy that perceived himself to be smart, there is no shame in saying, I don't know about a certain subject. With our second example, if the friend, when asked for advice, chose to avoid their true feelings based on their observations, then he would have been someone of high character in that aspect. However, him not keeping it real with his friend and choosing deceptive language to avoid a possible tough conversation where they may or may not hurt their friend's feelings, ultimately in the long run does more damage to that person's character. You have to ask yourself this question. Would you like the reputation of someone that will keep it real with you at all times or not? I know for myself, and of course, I'm not perfect, brothers. I'm not perfect, sisters. I know I'm not perfect, but I always like to have the reputation of Reggie tends to keep it real with you when you ask him. And sometimes even when he doesn't ask, right? And that's a good reputation to have. It is vital for us to use clear language. The use of clear language creates in us a clear mind. A clear mind gives us clarity and strength to confront issues head on instead of letting them fester inside. A clear mind also creates a sense of ownership and makes even more room for us to rightly divide right from wrong and truth from lies, which ultimately leads us to having a stronger sense of moral character. Without further ado, let us transition to Booker T. Washington's speech, Calling Things by Their Right Names. A few evenings ago, I talked with you about the importance of learning to be simple, humble, and childlike before going out into the world. You should remain in school until you get to the point where you feel that you do not know anything, where you feel that you are willing to learn from anyone who can teach you. Unfortunately, there are many things here in the South which tends to lead away from the simplicity to which I have referred. There is a great inclination to make things appear what they are not. For example, take the schools. There is a great tendency to call schools by names which do not belong to them and which do not correctly represent that which in reality exists. You will find the habit growing more prevalent every year, I fear, of calling a school a university or a college or an academy or a high school. In fact, we seldom hear of a plain, common, public, or graded school. We do ourselves no good when we yield to that temptation. If a school is a public school, call it one. But do not think that we gain anything by calling a little country school with 2 or 3 rooms and 1 or 2 teachers, where some of the students are studying the alphabet, a university. And still, this is too often done throughout the South, as you know. No respect or confidence is gained by the practice, but, on the contrary, sensible people get disgusted with such false pretenses. When you go out into the world and meet with such cases as this, try to make the people see that it is a great deal better to call their small public school by a name which truly represents it than to call it a high school or an academy. I do not by any means intend to say that schools do not have the right to aspire to become high schools and colleges. What I mean to say is that it is hurtful to the race to get into a habit of calling every little institution of learning that is opened a college or a university. It weakens us and prevents us from getting a solid, sure foundation. Again, we make the same mistakes when we call every preacher or person who stands in the pulpit to read from it doctor, whether or not that degree has been conferred upon him. Sensible people get tired of that kind of thing. The degree of Doctor of Divinity was once held in the highest esteem, and was conferred only upon those ministers who really had become entitled to it because of some original research or other work of high scholarship. Among highly educated people, this rule holds still. But today, especially in the South, many a little institutions that open its doors and calls itself a college or a university is beginning to confer degrees and make doctors of divinity of persons who are unworthy of degrees. And sometimes, should these persons fail to get an institution to confer a degree on them, they confer it on themselves. The habit is getting to be so common that in little towns, the ministers are calling themselves doctors. One pastor will meet another and say, "Good morning, doctor." And the other, wishing to be as polite as his friend, will say, "How are you, doctor?" And so it goes on. until both begin to believe they are really doctors. Now, this practice is not only ridiculous, but it is very hurtful to us as a race, and it should be discouraged. Much the same criticism may be made of many of those who teach. A person who teaches a little country school, perhaps in a brush arbor, is called professor. Every person who leads a string band is called professor. I was in a small town not long ago, and I heard the people speaking of someone as the professor. I was anxious to know who the professor was, so I waited a few minutes, and finally the professor came up, and I recognized him as a member of one of our preparatory classes. Now, don't suffer the world to put you in this silly, ridiculous position. If people attempt to call you professor, or by any other title that is not yours, tell them that you are not a professor, that you are a simple mister. That is a good enough title for anyone. We have the same right to become professors as any other people. When we occupy positions which entitle us to that name, but we drag that title, which ought to be a badge of scholarship, down into the mud and mire when we allow it to be misapplied. We carry a similar kind of deception into our schoolwork when, in the essays which we read and the orations which we deliver, we simply rehearse matter a great deal of which has been copied from someone else. Go into almost any church where there's one of those doctors of divinities to whom I have referred, and you will hear sermons copied out of books and pamphlets. The essays, the orations, the sermons that are not the productions of the people who pretend to write them, all come from this false foundation. Then there is another error to which I wish to call to your attention. In many parts of the South, especially in the cities and towns, there are excellent public schools, well equipped in every way with apparatus and materials, and provided with good, competent teachers, but in some cases these schools are crippled by reason of the fact that there are little denominational schools which deprive the public schools of their rightful attendance. If the school can't be in the church of some particular denomination, it must be near it. In the average town, there may be the denominational school of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, of the Zion Church, of the Baptist Church, of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and so on in all different parts of the town. Instead of supporting one public school, provided at the expense of the town or city, there exists this little narrow denominational spirit which is robbing these innocent children of their education. We want to say to such people as these, people who are content so to deprive their children and have them taught by some second-rate teacher, that they are wrong. We want you to let the people know that the great public school system of America is the nation's greatest glory, and that we do not help matters when we are attempting to tear down the public schools. Of course, it is the right and the duty of every denomination to erect its own theological seminary in its colleges, where the special tenets of that denomination are taught to those who are preparing for its pulpits. But no one has the right to let this denominational spirit defeat the work of a public school to which all should be free to go. I have in mind a place where the colored people have an excellent school equal to that of the whites. I went through the building and found it supplied with improved apparatus and capable teachers, and saw that first-class work was done there. Later, I was taken about a mile outside the city, where there was a school with an incapable teacher and some 60 or 70 pupils being poorly taught. Here was a third-rate teacher in a third-rate building, poor work, and the children suffering for lack of proper instruction. Why? Simply because the people wanted a school of their own denomination in that part of the city. Now, you want to cultivate courage and see to it that you are brave enough to condemn these wrongs and to show the people the mistakes which they make in these matters? I mention all these things because they hinder us from getting a solid foundation. They hinder us further in that in many cases they prevent us from getting the right power of leadership in teaching, in the work of the ministry, and in many other respects. Wherever you go, then make up your minds that you are going to make your influence felt in favor of better prepared teachers and preachers, and better preparations of all those who stand for leaders of the people, just in proportions as you set your lives right in this matter, will the masses of the race be inclined to follow you. And hey, that's just a low down gospel truth. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Old Paths Podcast. And if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, comment, start a discussion, share the knowledge with your folks and kin folks if you enjoyed it. And don't be afraid to throw in the love offering with the Cash App in the description section. And remember, the truth shall make you free. May the God of all knowledge be with you all. Peace.